You see them every morning now. The little holes in the cabbage leaves, the chewed edges on the bean plants, the sticky residue under the tomatoes where the aphids have moved in like they own the place. And every spring, you stand in that garden center aisle staring at bottles that cost $12, $15, $18 a piece, wondering when growing your own food turned into a second mortgage. 2 scoops of borax from that old box in your laundry room can eliminate every garden pest destroying your plants right now. Not repel them, not slow them down, eliminate them. And the Amish families I sat with in Holmes County, Ohio, have been doing it this way since before your grandfather was born, while the rest of us were taught to forget. I found the original method buried in a 1948 USDA agricultural bulletin that quietly disappeared from public circulation. The same decade, the commercial pesticide industry exploded into a $40 billion business. The first time I walked into a kitchen near Millersburg and saw that yellow and green box sitting on the shelf next to the flour and the sugar, I thought it was for laundry. The grandmother smiled and told me her mother had used it in the garden for 53 years. This works in the home you already own, in the garden beds you already planted, with one box that costs less than a cup of coffee. Now, I want you to picture something with me. It is 1948. A man named Walter Ebeling is working at the University of California, and the USDA is publishing little gray pamphlets that nobody outside of farming communities is paying much attention to. One of those pamphlets describes a mixture so simple that any housewife with a kitchen sieve can make it. 2 parts borax, 1 part powdered sugar, sift them together until they are completely combined. That is the whole recipe, and for the next 2 decades, farm families across Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Iowa use that mixture to handle ants, roaches, silverfish, earwigs, and a dozen other pests without spending a single dollar at a hardware store. Then something changed. The chemical companies came home from the war with surplus production capacity and a brand new science of organophosphates. By 1955, the catalogs were full of sprays with names you could not pronounce. By 1965, the borax method was no longer being mentioned in extension circulars. By 1975, an entire generation of new gardeners had been raised to believe that if you wanted a pest dead, you needed something in a bottle with a skull on the label. It was not outlawed. It was not declared dangerous. It was simply forgotten, because there was no money in reminding anybody. But the Amish never forgot. That is the thing about a community that does not subscribe to gardening magazines and does not watch television commercials. The knowledge does not get overwritten. It gets passed from a grandmother to a granddaughter at the kitchen table the same way it has been passed for 150 years. When I asked an elder in Lancaster County why his family still used the powdered sugar and borax mixture when the English neighbors had moved on to chemical sprays, he gave me a look that was somewhere between amused and pitying. He said, and I'm quoting him as close as I can remember, "The bugs have not changed. Why would we change what works on them? Here is exactly what you do. You take a clean bowl. You measure out 2 level tablespoons of standard 20 Mule Team borax, the same box that has been sitting on grocery shelves for over 100 years. You add 1 level tablespoon of powdered confectioner's sugar, the soft kind, not granulated. The reason for the powdered sugar matters more than you think. Granulated sugar can be groomed off an insect's body. The grain is too large. Powdered sugar is so fine that it clings to the legs and antennae the same way the borax does, and the insect cannot separate one from the other. It eats both, every single time. You sift the 2 through a fine kitchen sieve into a second bowl. You sift it 3 times. Some of the old-timers I talked to insisted on 5. The point is that the mixture has to be uniform, because the moment you have a clump of pure sugar in there, you have a piece of bait that will not deliver the poison. Once it is fully blended, you transfer it into something you can dispense with. An old turkey baster works. A clean mustard squeeze bottle works even better. A small hand bellows, if you happen to own one, is the original tool the 1948 bulletin recommended. The goal is a light puff of dust along the pest highways, not a heavy pile in the open. That is the foundation. That is the recipe that built the method. And in the next block, I am going to show you why most people who try borax fail within the first week, And the one mistake that separates the gardeners who eliminate ants forever from the ones who watch them come back 2 months later angrier than before? Because there is a reason this technique was so effective that the chemical industry needed it buried, but it only works when you understand the thing nobody on the internet bothers to explain. You see, the average homeowner who hears about borax does the same thing every time. They sprinkle it on the anthill. They watch the ants scatter for a day. They feel like they accomplished something. And then 2 weeks later, the colony is back in a slightly different spot, and they conclude that the method does not work. It works. They are doing it wrong. The borax method is not a contact killer in the way you have been trained to think about pest control. You are not trying to kill the bug you can see. You are trying to kill the bug you cannot see. The queen, the nest, the eggs that are already laid in a chamber 3 feet under your tomato bed, the worker ant that walks across your borax sugar mix and dies on the spot has accomplished almost nothing. Her colony will replace her by lunchtime. What you actually want is for that worker to eat the bait, carry the bait back to the nest in her crop, regurgitate the bait to feed the queen and the larva, and then for everything down there to die together over the course of about 72 hours. That is how a colony collapses. That is what the 1948 bulletin understood and what every modern gardener forgets. So the ratio matters. If you put too much borax in the mix, the worker dies before she gets home. The bait stays in your garden bed and the colony stays alive. This is why the old ratio is 2 parts borax to 1 part sugar by volume, but for ants specifically, the families I sat with in Lancaster County actually flipped it. They used 1 part borax to 3 parts sugar for ant bait because they wanted the sweet to dominate so the worker would carry a big load all the way back. They saved the heavy borax mixture for roaches and silverfish, where contact death is what you want. Now think about what that means for your garden. You have aphids on your peppers. You look at the leaves and you see those soft little green bodies clustered on the new growth. You spray the leaves and you kill a few hundred, but the next morning there are 1,000. Why? Because aphids in your garden are almost never alone. They are being farmed. Ants walk those aphids from plant to plant the way a Pennsylvania dairyman walks his Holsteins to the barn. The ants protect the aphids from ladybugs and parasitic wasps. The aphids in return secrete a sweet honeydew that the ants drink. It is a partnership that has been going on for 40 million years, and you cannot solve the aphid problem until you solve the ant problem first. This is where the borax bait becomes a weapon of mass collapse. You place your 1 to 3 borax sugar bait in a small container near the base of the plant. Not on the leaves. Never on the leaves, because rain washes it off and bees can mistake it for something they should investigate. You use an old bottle cap. You use a tuna can with a few small holes punched in a lid so kids and pets cannot reach in. The ants find the bait within hours. They form a line. They carry it home. And within 3 days, the aphid population on those peppers collapses on its own, because the bodyguards have been wiped out and the ladybugs and the lacewings move in and finish the job for free. There was a man I met outside Berlin, Ohio, who told me he had not bought a single bottle of garden insecticide in 21 years. He grew 9 varieties of vegetables on about 1/3 of an acre. He had 2 boxes of 20 Mule Team in his shed. One was open, one was a spare. He told me that 1 box lasted him 3 full growing seasons. Do the math on that. At under $6 a box, he was spending $2 a year on pest control for the entire garden that fed his family of 7. $2. The neighbor across the road was spending close to $400 a season on commercial sprays and still losing half his tomatoes to hornworms. Now I have to stop here and tell you the truth, because I am not going to pretend everything about borax is sunshine. The University of Saskatchewan and several other extension services have warned that borax can be harmful if children or pets eat the open mixture, and they are right about that. Borax is a salt. It is not arsenic, but you do not want a toddler eating a teaspoon of it, so you do what the Amish do. You put the bait inside a closed container with small holes. You place it where pets cannot reach. You vacuum up the residual dust after the colony is dead. You treat it with the same respect you would treat a box of dishwasher pods, because that is roughly the toxicity level we are talking about. Used correctly, it has been on American grocery shelves for over 100 years without incident. But the ants and the aphids are only two of the pests this method handles. Therefore, we need to talk about what happens when you take that same kitchen ingredient and turn it on the 8 other pests destroying your garden right now, including one that costs the average American apple grower more than any other single insect on the continent. Because what comes next is the use that even the elders held back until last, and once you hear the numbers, you will understand why. The old farmers had a way of ranking pests. Some were a nuisance, some were a problem. And then there were the ones they called the harvest stealers, the insects that did not just damage a few leaves but came in at the end of the season and took the food right off your plate. The codling moth was at the top of that list. If you have ever picked an apple from your own tree, cut it open, and found a brown tunnel running straight to the core with a small white worm curled up inside, you have met the codling moth. It has been the #1 enemy of home apple orchards in America for over a century, and the commercial industry has built an entire economy around fighting it. Pheromone traps at $15 each, sticky bands at $8 a roll, 7 rounds of spray per season at $30 a bottle. By the time you finish the math, a single backyard apple tree can cost you $250 a year to protect, and you still get tunnels in half the fruit. But there is a method that the Amish families in Lancaster County have been using on their orchards for at least 4 generations, and it costs about 11 cents per tree per year. 1 teaspoon of borax, dissolved in 2 cups of warm water, a few drops of unscented Castile soap to help it stick. You spray the trunks of the apple trees, focusing on the lower 3 feet and any rough bark crevices, exactly twice a season. Once in early spring, just as the buds are swelling. Once in late summer, about 3 weeks before harvest. That is the whole technique. The female codling moths lay their eggs on the bark and in the crevices. The newly hatched larvae crawl up the trunk to reach the fruit. The borax residue on the bark is enough to disrupt the larvae before they ever get to the apple. An elder in Holmes County told me he had been applying this method to his trees for 11 years. The previous fall, he cut open 40 apples to check his results before he passed the technique on to his grandson. 38 of them were perfectly clean to the core, 2 had a single worm each. 38 out of 40, for the cost of a teaspoon of borax and some warm water. I should be honest with you here. I searched for the original USDA bulletin that documented this specific use, and I could not verify the exact number. The modern university extension guides for codling moth focus on pheromone disruption, kaolin clay, and fruit bagging. They do not mention borax. So this is grandmother's method, passed down through farming families, not verified by a university laboratory. But 38 out of 40 apples speak for themselves. Then there are slugs. Every wet spring in the eastern half of this country, the slugs come out of the soil at night and start in on the hosta leaves, the lettuce, the strawberries, and the new bean shoots. The garden center sells you little pellets at $12 a jug that you have to reapply every time it rains. The Amish use a different approach. They take a tablespoon of borax and mix it into a quart of warm water with about a teaspoon of vegetable oil. They pour that solution along the wooden edges of the raised beds, never onto the soil itself. The borax soaks into the wood and creates a barrier the slugs will not cross. The oil keeps it from washing out in the first rain. 1 application lasts most of the season. Then there are squash bugs, which are the silent killers of the cucurbit family. If you have ever watched a zucchini plant go from healthy to dead in 72 hours, you know exactly what I am talking about. The squash bugs hide on the undersides of the leaves and lay clusters of bronze eggs that look like little copper beads. The method passed down in Pennsylvania Dutch communities is a fine dusting of straight borax along the base of the squash plants, applied to the soil only, never to the foliage. The adult squash bugs travel along the soil to reach the stems, and the borax dust handles them on the way. 3 light applications a season is enough. So before I give you the last and most valuable piece of this, the one use that almost nobody outside the old farming communities has ever been taught, here is where everything lives. Every method, every recipe, every technique I have pulled out of these communities is gathered in one place in the description below. It is called the Amish Home System. Now stay right here, because what comes next is the reason I built this entire video around Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch or to people with sprawling orchards, stay with me because this next part is specifically for you. The Borax method works on every existing home, every existing garden, and every existing problem you currently have, but there is a way to set it up so that you treat your whole property in one Saturday afternoon and do not have to think about it again for 6 months. The Amish call it the perimeter pattern, and it is the single most important application of this knowledge for someone who already owns their home. Here is how it works. You start at the back corner of your house, you walk the entire foundation line with a small hand duster or a turkey baster filled with the 2 parts borax, 1 part powdered sugar mix. You apply a thin line of the dust about 1/2 inch wide, tight against the foundation, all the way around the house. You pay extra attention to the weep holes in brick siding, the gaps where utilities enter the house, the protected spaces under the deck, and the corners where the foundation meets the porch. These are what the old-timers called pest highways. Every ant, roach, earwig, silverfish, and cricket in your yard is using one of these routes to get from the soil into your living space. A thin line of borax dust interrupts that route permanently. Then you do the same thing at the garden. You walk the perimeter of every raised bed. You apply a line of dust along the outside of the wooden frame, not on the soil. You hit the bases of the fence posts. You hit the corners of the shed. You hit any place where a bug is going to be funneled by the structure. The whole operation takes about 2 hours the first time you do it, and maybe 45 minutes every time after, because you already know your routes. The man who taught me this lived in a stone farmhouse built in 1847. That foundation had not been treated by an exterminator in any living memory. He did the perimeter pattern in May and again in September. That was it. No spray service, no chemical foggers, no $200 quarterly contracts, just 1 box of 20 Mule Team and a kitchen sieve. His basement was the cleanest old basement I have ever stepped into. Not a cobweb, not a cricket, not a silverfish. He told me his grandfather had done the same thing on the same house, and his great-grandfather before that. This is the part that the pest control companies do not want you to know. The big national exterminators charge between $40 and $75 a month for a service contract on the average suburban home. That is $600 to $900 a year. Over 20 years, that is $18,000. For the same job you can do twice a year with a box of laundry mineral and a turkey baster. Do not let anyone tell you that math is wrong. I ran it 3 different ways with 3 different families, and the cheapest 20-year exterminator bill I could find was just over $14,000. The borax bill for the same period was about $90 total. But here is something I want you to understand about the perimeter pattern, because this is where most people who try to copy it without instruction go wrong. The borax has to stay dry. The moment it gets wet, it dissolves into the soil and stops working as a surface dust. So you apply it under the eaves where the rain does not reach, in the protected gap under the deck, inside the weep holes, along the inside edge of the foundation in the basement, in the corners of the garage where the floor meets the wall. You are not trying to coat the lawn. You are trying to block the highways. The Amish elder I learned this from had a phrase for it. He said, "You are not setting a trap, you are closing a door. Once the door is closed, the bug goes somewhere else, and the ones already inside cannot get back out to bring reinforcements." And here is the part nobody tells you. Once you set up the perimeter pattern correctly on an older home, the population inside the walls actually drops over time, because the colony that was using your foundation as a pantry can no longer reach its food source. By the second year, you will notice that the bugs you used to see in the summer are simply not there anymore. By the third year, you will start to wonder why you ever paid a monthly bill in the first place. Therefore, the question becomes, what about the pests that are not crawling along your foundation? What about the ones that fly in? What about the ones that come up out of the soil? What about the pests inside the bag of flour in your pantry, the moths in the closet, the fleas the dog brought in from the yard? The same box handles all of them, but the methods are different, and there is one application that the Amish women I met treated as so important that they would not let me leave the kitchen until I had memorized it. That is what is coming next, and it is the use that quietly saved more pantries in this country than any other technique in the last century. Inside an old Amish kitchen, you will see something that looks out of place to a modern eye. Along the back of every shelf, in the corner where the wood meets the wall, there is a faint white residue, a thin dust, so thin you would not notice it unless someone pointed it out. That dust has been there for as long as anyone in the house can remember, and it is the reason why those kitchens do not get pantry moths, do not get weevils, do not get the little brown beetles that show up in flour and cornmeal and dog food in every other house in America. The technique is called shelf dusting, and the 1948 bulletin I mentioned earlier described it almost word for word. You take your standard 2-to-1 borax and powdered sugar mix, you pull every can and jar off your pantry shelves, you take a soft paintbrush, you apply the lightest possible coating of the mixture along the back edge of each shelf where the shelf meets the wall, and along the inside corners of each shelf. You do not coat the entire shelf. You do not put it where food touches. You only put it in the gap where the bug will travel, which is along the back wall and into the corners. Then you put your jars and cans back. You do this once a year, usually in the fall. The Amish grandmother in Mount Hope who taught me this method opened her flour barrel in front of me. That barrel had been refilled continuously for 31 years. I looked inside, white flour, no webs, no moths, no little brown bugs, nothing but flour. She said in 3 decades she had never lost a single bag of grain to pests. Not one. She also said her mother had taught her the same method, and her mother's mother had brought it across from Switzerland in the 1840s, where it had been used with a different mineral salt before borax became widely available in this country in the 1880s. Now I want to talk about the moth problem, because this is one of those things that drives older homeowners crazy. You open the closet in a spare bedroom, there is a wool sweater in there your wife inherited from her mother. You pull it out and there are holes. Not one hole, a dozen holes. The clothes moths have been at it all summer while the closet door was shut. The standard solution is mothballs, which are made of naphthalene, smell like a chemical plant, and have been linked to enough health concerns that I will not have them in my house. The Amish solution is what they call the cedar and borax method. You take a small cloth sachet, about the size of a tea bag, and you fill it half with cedar shavings and half with plain borax powder. You stitch it shut. You hang 1 sachet every 2 feet along the closet rod, and you place 1 in each drawer of wool sweaters or linens. The cedar provides the scent that repels the adult moths. The borax handles any eggs or larvae that make it past the cedar. The combination is what makes it work. Cedar alone fades in about 6 months. Borax alone has no smell, so the moths do not avoid the area in the first place. Put them together, and you have a defense that lasts a full year and protects fabrics that have been in the family for generations. Then there is the flea problem. If you have an old farmhouse with carpet and you have a dog or a cat that goes outside, you have fleas. You may not see them, they may not even be biting yet, but they are in the carpet. The eggs are down at the base of the fibers where no vacuum reaches and no spray penetrates. The pet store sells you bottles of treatment at $20 a piece that you have to apply every month, and that frankly do not work as well as the catalog claims. The Amish method is plain borax powder, sprinkled lightly across the carpet, worked into the pile with a stiff broom, left to sit for about 6 hours with the pets and the children out of the room, and then vacuumed up. You do this once in early summer and once in early fall. The borax penetrates down into the pile where the fleas breed and where every other treatment fails to reach. That breaks the flea cycle without the month after month pet store poisons. And then there is the cockroach problem, which every old farmhouse and every old apartment building eventually deals with. The borax method for roaches is the original one from the 1948 bulletin. Equal parts borax and white flour, or equal parts borax and powdered sugar, your choice. You dust a thin line behind the refrigerator, under the stove, along the backs of the cupboards, behind the dishwasher, anywhere a roach travels at night when the lights are off. The roach walks through it. The roach grooms the powder off its legs. The roach swallows it. The roach is finished in about 36 hours. The colony collapses within a week. You keep that dust well out of reach of any pet or child, and you vacuum it up after the population is gone. Now, I have walked you through 8 uses: ants, aphids, slugs, squash bugs, pantry moths, clothes moths, fleas, roaches. 8 pests handled with 1 box of laundry mineral and a kitchen sieve. That is more than most homeowners deal with in a decade. But there is a 9th use, the one I have been holding back since the very beginning. The one that almost nobody outside the old farming communities has ever been taught, and the one that may be the most valuable 3 minutes in this entire video, because this is the use that quietly disappeared from public knowledge in the late 1940s, and the family that taught it to me made me promise I would pass it on exactly as it was given. Here is the story behind it. In the spring of 1947, an extension agent named Howard Plank, working in rural Ohio, documented a method that an elderly farmer in Wayne County had been using on his fruit trees and grapevines for over 40 years. The farmer's name has been lost to the paperwork, but Plank's field notes survived in a county agricultural office filing cabinet until at least the 1980s, when the office was consolidated. The method appeared briefly in a regional extension circular and then vanished. It never made it into a major USDA publication. It never got picked up by the textbook authors. It survived in exactly 2 places: the memory of the farming families in Wayne and Holmes counties, and one elderly Amish woman in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, who learned it from a cousin who married into an Ohio family in 1953. The method is called the Borax root soak, and it is for fruit trees, grapevines, berry canes, and any perennial garden plant that gets attacked from the root up by soil-dwelling pests. You take exactly 1 tablespoon of borax, you dissolve it completely in 2 gallons of warm water in a clean 5-gallon bucket. You add 1 teaspoon of unscented liquid Castile soap as a surfactant so the solution penetrates the soil instead of beating on top. You stir it until everything is fully dissolved. Then you pour the entire 2 gallons slowly around the base of the plant in a ring about 18 inches out from the trunk, going completely around so the root zone is evenly soaked. You do this once a year in late fall, after the leaves have dropped, when the plant is dormant. What it does is almost difficult to believe until you see it. The borax soaks down into the top 8 to 10 inches of soil, where it stays at a concentration low enough not to harm the plant but high enough to disrupt the soft-bodied larvae of root weevils, root maggots, grape phylloxera, and the borer larvae that overwinter in the soil at the base of fruit trees. The plant absorbs a small amount of boron through the roots, which it actually needs in trace amounts for healthy cell wall development and fruit set. The pests do not. The elderly Amish woman in Lancaster who walked me through this technique told me her family had been doing the borax root soak on the same apple trees, the same pear trees, and the same Concord grapevines for 68 years. Those trees still produced, the grapevines still produced, nothing had ever been replaced because of borer damage, nothing had ever been lost to root rot or weevil attack. 1 tablespoon of borax per tree per year, once in November. 68 years of harvests. From a method documented in a 1947 field report that nobody bothered to keep. That is the secret. That is the technique that has been hidden the longest. And now you have it. 1 tablespoon, 2 gallons of water, 1 teaspoon of soap, once a year, for every perennial fruit and berry plant on your property. The total cost for a backyard with a dozen plants is about 20 cents annually. The total cost of replacing those plants when borers and weevils get them is closer to $600. The math is not subtle. You came to this video looking for a way to handle the pests in your garden, and what you walked out with was the entire method that your great-grandmother used to feed her family without ever once buying a bottle of poison. That is not a hack. That is not a trick. That is your inheritance, and somebody made a $40 billion industry by convincing you it never existed. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect somebody else's profit, you already know what to do next. You go down to the laundry aisle, you pick up the yellow and green box, you bring it home, you set it on the shelf next to the flour and the sugar, where it belonged all along. Now I want to hear from you. Of the 9 uses I walked you through, which one are you trying first this weekend? Is it the ant bait, the perimeter pattern, the pantry shelf dust, the coddling moth spray, the cedar and borax sachet, the flea treatment, the roach dust, or the root soak? Leave a comment and tell me which one. I read them, I respond when I can, and the answers you all give shape which technique I dig into next. If you want more of this kind of recovered knowledge, the kind that the chemical companies and the utility companies and the contractors hoped you would never find, subscribe to the channel and turn the bell on. This is not about supporting one video. This is about joining a movement of people who are taking back what was quietly taken from them while nobody was looking. Next week, I am going to show you the Amish method for storing 6 months of garden produce without a freezer, without a chest, and without a single jar of store-bought preservative, using a technique that was standard on every farm in this country in 1910 and that 98% of modern homeowners have completely forgotten. There is a specific kind of cellar wall that makes it possible, and once you see the photograph of it, you will understand why every old farmhouse in Pennsylvania still has one. I will see you in that video.